As promised, we deliver. In our last episode, we plunged into the dramatic escalation of the US-China dynamic, witnessing the trade war transform into a military spectacle. But to truly grasp the gravity of that moment, we must first understand its deep historical roots. What if I told you that the very foundations of today's intense rivalry were laid in an era of unexpected cooperation? What if the seeds of economic interdependence, now a source of profound tension, were once sown to counter a far greater threat? And how did a seemingly unbreakable bond, forged in the fires of the Cold War, gradually unravel into the complex, often confrontational relationship we see today? Join us as we journey back in time to uncover the surprising origins of the US-China relationship and trace its remarkable evolution, from a strategic partnership to an intense economic and geopolitical competition. Our story begins not with tariffs or trade deficits, but with a clandestine journey and a handshake that reshaped the 20th century. In 1972, against a backdrop of intense Cold War tensions, U.S. President Richard Nixon embarked on a groundbreaking, secret visit to Beijing. This was no ordinary diplomatic trip. It was a strategic masterstroke, meticulously designed to exploit the growing rift between two communist giants, China and the Soviet Union. For decades prior, the United States had maintained a rigid policy of isolating communist China, steadfastly recognizing Taiwan as the legitimate government of all China. This policy, a relic of the post-World War II era, had effectively cut off diplomatic and economic ties with mainland China. But the world was changing. The Sino-Soviet split, a deep ideological and political divide that had been simmering for years, now openly hostile, engaging in border skirmishes and ideological condemnations. By opening channels to Beijing, the U.S. aimed to gain crucial leverage over Moscow, fundamentally altering the global balance of power in its favor. It was a classic case of, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." This historic visit, famously dubbed the week that changed the world, laid the essential groundwork for the eventual normalization of diplomatic relations. It was a pragmatic alliance, born out of mutual strategic necessity rather than any shared values. For China, it offered an escape from decades of international isolation, a chance to break free from the shadow of the Soviet Union, and a potential pathway to economic modernization. For the U.S., it was a bold Cold War strategy, one that would allow Washington to play China and the Soviet Union against each other. Following the diplomatic breakthrough, China embarked on a transformative journey, that of radical economic reform, under the pragmatic leadership of Deng Xiaoping, who famously declared, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice." China began to shed its rigid communist economic policies in favor of a more market-oriented approach. This period, known as reform and opening up, introduced special economic zones in places like Shenzhen, encouraged foreign investment, and pushed for integration into the global economy. Millions were lifted out of poverty at an unprecedented pace. China's economic might began its astonishing ascent. The United States and its allies supported this transformation, believing that economic liberalization would naturally lead to political liberalization. Western companies rushed to China, drawn by its cheap labor and vast consumer market. Supply chains shifted, and China became the world's factory. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. This was celebrated as a triumph of globalization. But beneath the optimism, tensions simmered. Concerns about intellectual property theft, technology transfers, and an uneven playing field quietly grew. The very success of integration would become a source of future friction as China's economic power expanded. So did its assertiveness and its willingness to challenge the rules. For decades after Deng's reforms, China followed a cautious strategy, known as hide and bide. Focus on internal development. Accumulate strength. Avoid confrontation. But with the rise of Xi Jinping in 2012, this approach shifted dramatically. Xi brought a new vision: the China Dream, national rejuvenation, a more assertive role in global affairs. Under Xi's leadership, China launched bold initiatives: the Belt and Road Initiative, a global infrastructure project linking Asia, Africa, and Europe, and the Made in China 2025 plan, a clear push to dominate advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and high-end manufacturing. These moves alarmed Washington and its allies, who saw them as direct challenges to their supremacy. The U.S. had hoped engagement would lead to a more democratic China. Instead, it faced a stronger, more authoritarian state. Concerns grew: human rights abuses in Xinjiang, the crackdown in Hong Kong, cyber espionage, and military expansion in the South China Sea. The stage was set for direct confrontation. The era of hide and bide was over. The dragon was ready to roar, and the world was about to feel its breath. From Nixon's gamble, to Deng's reforms, to Xi's assertive global posture, the U.S.-China relationship transformed. What began as cooperation against a common foe evolved into a partnership of economic convenience, and finally, into a fierce geopolitical and technological rivalry. The trade war was not an isolated event. It was the symptom of deeper structural shifts and a fundamental reevaluation of interests. Economic engagement was no longer a panacea. Instead, competition became the defining theme. Technology, military power, and ideology now intertwined with economics. The lines between trade and national security blurred. But as these giants clashed, what was the true cost? Who really won and who lost in this escalating global chess game? And are we now entering a new, fragmented world order? Join us in the next episode as we unravel the hidden costs and consequences of the U.S.-China trade war. Subscribe now to stay informed. This is the Unscripted Show. Peace to all.